the last thing we did yesterday was we spoke about this idea, very beautiful idea of children. You know, what are children? Children are not just biological children, there are spiritual children. There are, Moshe teaches Aaron's children, so they have they're regarded as being like his own children, and that's what the pasuk says. Ve'ele told us Aaron and Moshe, that they're included inside of the descendants of Moshe. And then after that, what have we got? We've got over here the Levi. Vayidam Hashem, down at the bottom, verse number 5, it says, Vayidam Hashem Moshe lemor ka'krevis mata Levi v'madato isoi lifnei Aaron hakohen v'sher so isoi. The tribe of Levi are going to be brought to serve Aaron. Now what's happened? Aaron, of course, is the Kohen. Aaron's children have been given the same status. They're Kohanim as well. And underneath the Kohanim are going to be the Levim. We spoke about this the other day, the idea of being a hierarchy, and you've got the Kohanim at the top and then the Levim underneath. Is anybody here a Kohen or a Levi? No? Okay.
Not yet.
Or Nevi will come and we'll work out who's who, right? But Akrevis Mata Levi, Aaron HaKohen V'Sher So. So why is the tribe of Levi being brought now to serve? Right? Secondly, what was going on before that? Which means that the Kohanim, Aaron has always been the Kohen Gadol. He's always been there to represent the Jewish people spiritually. And if that's the case, who's been helping Aaron up until now?
Well,
so
he was a Levi.
Aaron was a Levi. But again, originally the idea was that it was going to be Shevet Levi, and from Shevet Levi, Aaron was being taken and elevated to a different position. But that didn't mean that Shevet Levi were going to have any kind of a special relationship with Aaron like exists today with the Kohanim, right? So what was going on was quite simple, that the firstborn in each family, the firstborn male in each family, was considered to be to make this simple and to understand, the Levi in each family, right? Which means that instead of having a tribe that was designated to help Moshe Rabbeinu, what you had was the firstborn male in each family coming to serve under Aaron, to be the assistants of Aaron.
Even though you Yisrael?
Yeah. The Bechor. We've got some Bechors over here. Here, you're a firstborn, right?
Yeah.
Anybody else here a firstborn? Yeah, you too. Which means that in the desert, when you came out from Egypt, your task would have been to be the spiritual assistants to Aaron and his sons, and there wouldn't have been a designated tribe that was going to do that.
So the rest of the Levies are...
They would have been a regular tribe, just like everybody else. What changed?
Yeah.
What changed was, of course, the sin of the golden calf. Yeah. With the sin of the golden calf, it says like this, that when Moshe Rabbeinu came down and saw what was going on, and he realized that the whole of the Jewish people were involved in one form or another. Some people were actively involved, some people were passively involved. So it says that Moshe called out, Mi la Hashem Elai. Whoever for God come to me. Which means whoever's going to stand up for God's honor over here, the whole of Shevet Levi came. At that point, God made a decision that the Bechor, the firstborn, was going to lose their rights to serve as the assistants of the Kohanim, and that was going to be transferred in its entirety, was going to be transferred to Shevet Levi. So the tribe of Levi now are going to become the assistants to the Kohanim, and that's the way it's going to work. And a Bechor, from now on, doesn't have that status, although we'll see in a minute, there's something called a Pidyon Haben, which we're going to have to deal with that as well. There's a residue of Kedusha, a residue of holiness that rests with the firstborn male child, and something has to be done in order to make sure that the firstborn child is able to live a regular normative life. But in the meantime, what has happened like this, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu now has made a decision that Shevet Levi are going to take the place of all of the Bechors, all of the firstborn, and that's what's going on over here. That's why now HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying to Moshe that Shevet Levi are the ones who are going to come and serve, right? They're Madato Yisrael Lifnei Aaron HaKohen V'Sher So. So they're going to serve Aaron, right, in a spiritual capacity. What's fascinating about Shevet Levi is that Shevet Levi together with Shevet Shimon, but for a different reason. But Shevet Levi, the tribe of Levi, were not given a portion in the land of Israel.
Yeah.
They didn't have a piece of land. They had bits and pieces that were spread all over the place. Different towns, there were different cities called the Ari Miklat. That's where the Leviim lived. And the idea was, because they were the spiritual role models of the Jewish people, so they were given the task of living all over the land. Which was wherever you were, you had to have access to these people because they were considered to be spiritually on a higher level than you were, and you could learn from them. They could become your spiritual mentors. Verse number 7. V'shamru es mishmatoi v'es mishmeres kol ha'eder lifnei ol moed la'avod es avodas hamishkan. And what are they going to do? They're going to take charge of the practical dimensions of the tabernacle, which is the Kohanim are not going to be involved in taking the tabernacle to pieces and putting it back together again each time they move and each time that they settle down again, and that's going to be left for the Leviim to do. Interestingly enough, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the travels, for 40 years they travelled through the desert, and there were 42 stops on the way. However, there was a complete and absolute imbalance with the stops, because in one place they stopped for 19 years. Which really, they're stopping and moving pretty regularly, right? Because if you take the 41 stops and divide that by to take away 19 and then divide it, you'll see that they're moving every 6 months or so. They've got to move. They're up and moving, but it didn't even work like that because there was nothing consistent about it. Chazal, the sages say that what would happen was that they would travel, and the either the fire or the cloud would come to a standstill. And they would say that this is where they're going to camp. And it could be that by the time they've established the camp, then God would say, okay, let's go. We're going again.
Why?
Why was that? So the emphasis that the reason that was done was they had to rely on HaKadosh Baruch Hu entirely. It says by Avram Avinu, we learned this already from Avram Avinu, right? What does it say about Avram Avinu? It says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu came to Abraham and he says to him, Lech Lecha. Go. It doesn't say where. If God came to us and said, Lech Lecha, well,
but he doesn't from your land.
Oh, he says where to go from, but he doesn't tell him where to go to, right? Which means that if God were to come to us and say, Lech Lecha, what would we say?
Where?
Where are we going? How much nosh do I need to take? How long is this going to take? Right? Avram doesn't do anything. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says go, he just gets up and he goes. The same kind of a dimension over here. God says, here, I want you to camp over here. Everybody, can you imagine? It must have been unbelievable. Yet we're talking about millions of people, which means that the whole process is enormous of getting people to stop, getting them to camp. And you get it all sorted out, and then God says, okay, that's it, we're going. And now everything's got to be packed up again, and you've got to be taken out again. And you've got to keep moving.
Hashem doesn't want us to get acclimated to any place.
For sure. It's interesting. The Gemara says that sometimes they would come to very beautiful places and they would, stop there for a very brief period of time, and sometimes they would end up in a very inhospitable place and they would stay there for a while. And I think what you said is 100% true. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted the nature of the Jewish nation is to be in a state of movement and to be in places that we do want to be in and that we don't want to be in until we get to the land of Israel.
For example, America.
For sure.
So, was the idea here, each time in those years that there was a move, it was always precipitated by the movement?
Yeah. They could only ever move or camp according to either the cloud or the fire, depending on whether it was night or day.
Wow.
That's how they knew. That's how they knew where to stop. That was their pointer. I'll tell you something else, which I think is, again, we're talking about an enormous amount of people moving, right? Everyone's walking. You can imagine that the people at the back, when you're in a car and there's a lot of traffic and you get to the traffic light, you're in trouble when the traffic light changes back to red and you haven't moved yet.
Yeah.
That means there's a lot of cars ahead of you, right?
Yeah.
It was for sure what was going on over there with the Jewish people was that you would get the front arriving to where they need to get to, and I don't know how long it would take until the back would catch up.
So Amalek got involved.
That's where they came from, and it was the stragglers at the back. But even just the idea of getting up and moving, and it was the same thing when they left as well, which means the people at the front were getting up and moving first. How long did it take until the people at the back were up and moving as well? I don't know. We're talking about millions of people. Maybe it could have taken a couple of days to get going, no? That doesn't sound like it's beyond the realms of possibility. Which means, again, you've got this situation where some of the people are already started moving and some of the people are still waiting, and it's not an easy situation to be in. So they're being told what? The Levim are being told that what part of their brief is to take care of the tabernacle. It's got to be taken to pieces, it's got to be covered up, it's got to be put back together again. That all takes expertise, and it's got to be done. Normally it's got to be done pretty quickly as well. Right? When the cloud or the fire starts to move, then at that point they've got to get going. They've got to take the tabernacle to pieces. 1, 2, 3. So v'sham was called klei oil moed ves mishmeretz b'nei Yisrael la'avodas hamishkan. V'nasates halavim la'aron levonav nesunim heim aloi meis b'nei Yisrael. And they come. They're being passed through to Aaron and to his sons. There's Aaron and his banav tivkoi v'sham was kunasam v'ozav v'kerev yumas. And the Kohanim, they are being designated as Kohanim. That's it. If you're a Kohen, you're a Kohen. If you're not a Kohen, you're not a Kohen. There's nothing you can do about it. There's an age-old Jewish joke, which, if you've heard it 1,000 times, it still makes you smile, because it's just like, it's so ridiculous that it's true, about the fellow that comes to the rabbi and he says, Rabbi, he says, I want to be a Kohen. And the rabbi says, I'm sorry, he says, but you can't do that. It's not possible. And the fellow says, Rabbi, he says, no, I insist. I want to be a Kohen. The rabbi says, really, you can insist as much as you want, but it's not going to happen. And the fellow says, Rabbi, I'm prepared to pay. So the rabbi said, well, why didn't you say so? Okay, so for $5,000, I can turn you into a Kohen. So the fellow gives him $5,000. The rabbi puts his hands on top of his head and he mumbles, says, that's it, you're a Kohen now. The fellow's pleased as can be. And the rabbi says to him, tell me, he says, just explain to me, why was it so important for you to become a rabbi? He says, to become a Kohen. He says, Rabbi? He says, my father was a Kohen, and my grandfather was a Kohen, and I want to be a Kohen too. So if anybody wants to be a Kohen, we can arrange all kinds of things over here, right? But you chat, a Kohen is a Kohen, that's it, there's nothing you can do about it. And if somebody tries to do the work of a Kohen, if he's not a Kohen, then he's bringing upon himself a death penalty, which is not good. And we spoke about this, when was it, yesterday, the other day, this idea of a person taking upon himself something which is beyond his spiritual capabilities. So now, let's have a look and see. Now we've got a problem. What's the problem? The problem is that we've got a whole bunch of firstborns who are designated as being holy, and now we've got a whole shevet, a whole tribe that's been designated as being holy. What are we going to do? So it says HaKadosh Baruch Hu like this, Vayida b'Hashem Moshe lemor, V'ani hine lekachti es haLevim mitoich b'nei Yisrael tachas kol b'chol peterechem ibnei Yisrael vayu li laHalevim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying like this, we're going to have to make a trade-off over here. Right? Because we've got the Bechors, we've got the firstborn, and they've now lost their status, and we're going to trade them off with the Levium, which means it's going to be a trade-off of 1 for 1. Right? Ki li kol b'chor b'yom ha'koisi kol b'chor b'eretz Mitzrayim ikdashti li kol b'chor b'Yisrael mi'od mat behema li yu ani Hashem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, why was the firstborn considered to be holier than everybody else up until now? Yeah, because if anybody remembers what took place in Pesach, the plague of the firstborn, right? The firstborn were killed, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu passed over the homes of the Jewish people, and by doing that, the firstborn Jewish men, they've got like a status of being holier than they were before, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God has kept them alive. We're going to see, we're going to run into a little bit of a technical issue over here about the numbers. We'll get there. But before we go any further, in order to be able to do this, what has to be done? The Levium have to be counted. Because you got to know how many Levium there are in order to trade them off against the firstborns. But as opposed to the other people that were counted, remember at the beginning of Parshat Bamidbar, we had a counting. Who was counted?
20 years old.
From 20 years old upwards, right? And over here it's from a month upwards. Why is that? Because the counting of the first counting that took place was in order to find out how many people were able to go into the army. You got to be 20 years old in order to be drafted. Over here we're talking about what? This is a whole different setup. We're talking about who's going to be holy.
Yeah.
In order to be holy, they count from 30 days upwards. Why 30 days? Because the Gemara says that a baby up to 30 days is not considered to be completely viable. There's an interesting halacha. Nobody should ever knows from these things. But if a baby under 30 days dies, then there's no shiva. So which means a baby dies on the 29th day. The baby is buried, but there's no shiva. There's no mourning period. If the baby dies on the 31st day, then you have a full-blown shiva. You've got to sit shiva for 7 days, and you've got 30 days of mourning afterwards. Which means that this 30-day period, which is it's like the time period where the child makes a transition from being in the mother's womb to being part of the physical world over here, that's considered to be a transition period, and it's not counted.
Does it have an implication for abortion?
The first 30 days after birth.
No, I mean that it's not considered.
No, that's something else. You're thinking about the first 40 days from conception. Where over there the Gemara says that that's like it's considered to be mayim ba'alma. Right? The first 40 days after conception, the fetus is not considered to be viable at all. And if there's a miscarriage of any kind, here, we're talking about a firstborn, right? If there's a miscarriage within the first 30 days, it has no halachic ramifications whatsoever. If there's a miscarriage after that, then it could have ramifications for whether the next child born, whether he has the status of being a firstborn or not.
So we're against abortion under any circumstance.
We're not against abortion under any circumstances.
I mean,
the Torah says that abortion is something which under normal circumstances should not take place.
But if there's danger to the mother.
If there's a danger to the mother, is some kind of a medical issue that needs to be taken care of. So then, for sure, it's permissible to perform an abortion in order to get rid of the danger. It needs to be done. You need to have an expert in this particular dimension of halacha and an expert in the medical dimensions. They have to sit together and work out what's going on in order for the person to be able to rule.
So it might be after the first 40 days.
For sure.
When does it become a bechor? Even though he dies.
So within the halacha, if my memory serves me correct, then after 40 days from the conception, then that child is considered to be a bechor. And if that child doesn't reach, it's not a full term, there's a miscarriage somewhere along the line, then when the next child is born, the designation of bechor is no longer applicable.
Oh.
Right, and that has a ramification for things like pidyon haben. Yeah.
Rabbi Lauffer, on the point of there having to be 30 days of viability of this born child.
Yeah.
What constitutes viability? Is this something that it can't be purely physical? I mean, what is it that survives that 30 days and goes on that matters more? I mean, is that...
What other than physical would it be?
I think the emphasis is that I think it's really being measured physically over here. It's to do with whether the child is considered to be physically viable or not. I don't think it has anything to do with the spiritual dimensions. Which is, again, if a child lives 29 days, and that's considered to be, halachically, that's considered to be one kind of reality. And if the child dies on the 31st day, I'm deliberately skipping out the 30th day, right? But if the child dies on the 31st day, that's a different kind of halachic reality. And they're treated, again, each one's treated according to the way that the halacha says. So over here, you can't count the Leviim under 30 days old, because they're lacking that concept of halachic viability. Which means that's why the Leviim are being counted from 30 days upwards, they're going to be counted. ויפקוד את מוישה על פי השם כאשר צווה. והיו אלה בני לוי בשמויסם גרשון וכעס ומורי, ואלה שמויס בני גרשון למשפחות לבני ושמי, ובני כעס למשפחויסם עמרם ויצהר חברון ועוזיאל, ובני מורי למשפחויסם מחלי ומושי, אלה הם משפחויס הלי לוי סבוסם. What's interesting is you see that the names, right? They're not very many of them. Shevet Levi is a much smaller tribe. So they're going to count them, and they're going to be 22,000 Levium. Now, when we went through the numbers at the beginning, so we saw that the other tribes were much larger. But not only are the other tribes much larger, they're much, much larger. Why? Because the other tribes are being counted from the age of 20 upwards, 20 to 60. Here, they're being counted from the age of 30 days without any restriction whatsoever. And there are only 22,000 of them. So why are there so few members of the tribe of Levi? So explains the Gemara. That because the tribe of Levi, they were the only tribe that were not enslaved in Egypt. There was a law in Egypt that anybody involved in spiritual pursuits could not be enslaved. They were left on their own.
Even a Jew.
Even a Jew. Right? That was something, interestingly enough. Who put that into place? Joseph. Joseph, realizing that if there was going to be rough times over there, put into the law books over there a law that anybody involved, anyone considered to be a priest, anyone considered to be spiritual, was not beholden to the same laws as everybody else. They couldn't be enslaved. Joseph's motivation was that the Jewish people should just remain where they were and carry on learning Torah the whole time that they were in Egypt, and they'd be left alone. It didn't work like that, because the Jewish people, if there's something else that we can do, we'd love to do that rather than learn Torah. So they started assimilating into Egyptian society, and that's when the problems began. The only tribe that didn't do that was Levi, which means that the only tribe that wasn't enslaved was the tribe of Levi. That's one of the reasons why, I don't know if you ever wondered or if you ever thought about this, but how is it possible, if everybody's enslaved, that Aaron and Moshe are forever leaving, going, coming back, doing whatever they want? How can they do that? They're enslaved, aren't they? No, they weren't enslaved. They came from the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi had its own, it was living in its own little reality over there, which was very different from everybody else's. However, God gave a blessing to the Jewish people that within inside of their enslavement, they will multiply at a tremendous rate. It says that the Jewish mothers were giving birth to 6 children in one go. But not in Shevet Levi. In Shevet Levi, that blessing wasn't chal. It didn't rest on the tribe of Levi, because they were never enslaved to begin with. That's why we see that Yocheved, the mother of Miriam and Aaron and Moshe, she doesn't have 6 children all in one go. She has 3 children, one after the other. Why is that? So Shevet Levi, they're only going to have 22,000 members. They're much, much smaller than everybody else, because that blessing wasn't given to them.
Because God gave them the Kedusha, the Levim, because they did not sin by the Yegel.
Yeah. Which means that up until then, they were really no different from anybody else. But at that point, when God saw that they had that inner dimension of Kedusha, of holiness, and they were prepared to do whatever needed to be done in order to fulfill God's will, even when it wasn't something great. Right? I mean, they had to fight against other Jews over there after the golden calf, and yet they were prepared to do whatever needed to be done in order to fulfill God's will. Yeah. When God saw that commitment, at that point He said, "Okay, you people are going to be more spiritual than everybody else. You're going to have a different spiritual designation than everybody else."
The Levites, you said?
Yeah.
Against everybody else, even like other Jews.
Yeah. Again, we're back to the idea of the hierarchy again, which means you've got the regular, the what's called Yisrael down at the bottom of the pyramid, and then Levi in the middle. I'm not really the middle, towards the top, but a much smaller amount, and then the Kohanim, which are a much smaller amount than that, at the very top, and at the very top of the pyramid is going to be the Kohen Gadol, the high priest.
How do you tell if you're a Levi or not?
how do you tell if you're a Levi? I mean, again, being a Levi is something which is passed down through the father. Right? That's a tribe that you belong to. And if your father is a Levi, then you're a Levi. What's interesting is, with inside of the halacha, it says like this: over the years, there have been many people who've decided to become Kohanim. To be a Kohen, right, is obviously a big honor.
Right.
So people have decided, whatever on the way, they decided they want to spice up their pedigree a little bit. So they decide, they go live in a different place where no one knows them, and they introduce themselves as, I'm a Kohen. So it says, now it says that when Eliyahu Hanavi, when Elijah comes and he brings the Mashiach together with him, at that point, everyone's going to work out who they are. There are going to be a lot of Kohanim who are not Kohanim, and there are going to be a lot of people who weren't Kohanim who are going to become Kohanim.
But isn't it a big avera to claim you're a Kohen?
Yeah, for sure. But that's okay, because the honor, it's worth it, right? Again, you've got generations of people, they've got no idea. Which means that their father was a Kohen, their grandfather was a Kohen, their great-grandfather was... Maybe their great-great-great-grandfather decided that he wanted to be a Kohen. But now this generation, they don't have a clue. What's interesting is, though, that it doesn't say anywhere that we're going to have to sort out the Levium. Right? Elijah's not going to sort out the Levium. When he comes, you're a Levi, you're not a Levi, you thought you're a Levi, but really you're not, and you thought you weren't, and really you are. Why is that? So they explain the answer is really very simple. If you're already going to change your status, then you may as well become a Kohen. I mean, becoming a Levi is not going to help. What does a Levi do nowadays? What does a Levi do? He washes the hands of the Kohen before he goes to, bless the people, right? And he gets a second aliyah. He gets a second calling up to the Torah, right? So if you already want to change your status and you're going to say something which is not true, so at least go for gold.
But
right?
isn't there some way of constructing Gemara that if he could have lied about this?
A migoy. Migoy, right?
Migoy.
So you say like this: if somebody claims to be a Levi, then believe that he's a Levi. Why? Because if he was going to lie, he would have said that he was a Kohen. Yeah, that's a pretty compelling argument, I think. Why would anybody bother wanting to become a Levi, right?
A Levi or a Bas Levi? There's a pidyon.
No pidyon. There's no pidyon, right? There's no pidyon because of what's going on over here, which means that the Levim are taking the place of the Bechor, and they're retaining their status as being special, and therefore there's no redemption of the firstborn male.
Of the Levi.
Of a Levi, right? My father-in-law was a Levi.
Oh.
So you had a boy, you
So the emphasis was we struck out on all sides. We struck out because my eldest kid was a daughter, so it wasn't going to happen anyway, right? But if we would have had a son, there wouldn't have been a pidyon because she was my wife is a Bas Levi. She's a daughter of a Levi. In my family, it was pretty rare actually because my mother was also a Bas Levi. My grandfather was a Levi.
Wow.
Which means that when my eldest brother was born, there was no pidyon. The first pidyon that we had in the family was my eldest nephew was born. At that point, we'd lost the residue was gone, and unfortunately, we didn't have any kind of no kedusha left, right? So we had a pidyon. My eldest nephew had a pidyon aben. And in my family, actually, he's the only firstborn male. All my other brothers, myself included, we all had daughters first.
Wow.
It's interesting that because of the Second World War, and certainly because of communism, there was an awful lot of information that's been lost.
Yeah.
Who you are, who do you belong to? In the communist bloc,
excuse me.
There was somebody who davened in my father-in-law's shul, who was a Kohen. How did he know he was a Kohen? Because when he went back. He came from Romania. And when he went back there at a later date to see, to try to find the cemetery where his grandparents and great-grandparents were buried, he found that his great-grandfather had etched onto the stone the picture of the two hands like a Kohen.
Oh.
So he came and asked the question over here. He came to ask a Sheila, what does that mean? That was his paternal grandfather. His father was a communist and didn't believe in anything, and his father was no longer alive to be able to ask anyway. And he wanted to know, what did that mean? So he was given a psak that he was given a ruling that he should act as a Kohen. He should assume that until there comes some kind of a proof that he's not, he should assume that he is a Kohen.
Who gave him that psak?
I don't remember.
Well, obviously the picture.
But it's legitimate to get it
I mean-
sucked like.
I guess so. It's an interesting question, really. You
I
go,
mean, but
yeah.
obviously, it's an open and shut case. If the grandfather in the grave had the fingers of the
I don't know. I don't know if it's open and
Yes.
shut, but
I'm
I
saying,
think
what's the question?
you can say that presumably that's the
That
case.
it was
Right,
put
that's
on
it.
there and he wasn't a Cohen. That's the
Presumably that's the
Now what?
case.
question. That it was put on there, but he wasn't a Cohen.
It is,
No.
but it wouldn't.
Right.
You know what? It's
No.
interesting. If you go to Eastern Europe, go for example to the
There's no
cemetery,
favor, that is.
the cemetery in Warsaw,
Yeah. The big
which is
one?
enormous. It's got 250,000 graves in it.
Yeah.
And you'll see, it's fascinating. On the cemetery, very often you'll see, on the tombstones, you'll see all kinds of things. So, for example, by women, you'll see etched onto the stone 2 candles, right, because they lit Shabbos candles. By the men, you'll see if they were a Kohen, so they've got the hands, right. If they were a Levi, there's a symbol of the Levi. What was the symbol of the Levi? I can't remember. It was a coin of some kind. If there's a moil, so there would be maybe etched into the stone a knife. Right, etched into the stone was a little bit of history over here, right? Identification, which means I think you have to work on the premise that if somebody's got hands up on his tombstone,
like in Colombia, we knew who Cohen was. I don't know
How did you know?
because of the thing of the caver.
yeah, what it had hands on the tombstone. Yeah, interesting. There you
In other
go.
words, if an inscription on a tombstone is considered authentic,
I think under normal circumstances, yeah.
And they would say
Yeah.
HaKohen. I don't know that.
So here, by this fellow, it didn't say Cohen on the tombstone. Otherwise, that really is a giveaway. I don't know why, but he had the 2 hands.
Yes, who gave the psak? Psak was there. I mean, the
Yeah, so I
the
think
hands
again,
were there.
I think what needs to be done is like this. I think that people shouldn't make the decision by themselves, even though the hands are there.
Yeah.
Go and ask, but I think that it's probably pretty clear that if the hands are on the tombstone, then that's pretty clear that the person is a Kohen.
until proven otherwise.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, for sure.
Well, everything is
To
proven otherwise.
No, not
What
everything.
authority would it be a based
Cohen,
in making that
a
decision?
lady.
You don't need a
It
based
may
in for
not
that
be.
one. It's interesting, the Gemara, the Shulchan Aruch itself asks, that the Jewish law asks, there's a whole series of different laws, halachas, about how to treat Kohanim. So the Kohen gets the first aliyah, right, gets the first call up to the Torah. The Kohen is given the benching, right, when there's grace after meals, so he gets to lead the benching. The Kohen, there's certain things you can do, certain things you're not allowed to do, certain things you can't ask a Kohen to do. So ask the halacha, a very simple question. If we're not sure who's a Kohen and who's not, so how come all these laws are applicable? You hear the problem?
Yeah.
So it says over there, interestingly enough, it says that we're doing it only for keeping the peace, that's all. We're not, it's not that we're accepting without any shadow of a doubt that every person that is a Kohen is a Kohen. It's not true. But in the meantime, if somebody says that there's a Kohen, there's no reason to imagine that they're not until some kind of proof is brought that they're not.
You can tell by
And it's happened.
You can tell by the temper.
It's over here. It's interesting in the yeshiva we see from time to time people who think that they are Kohanim, and it transpires for some reason they're not, and they were behaving like Kohanim, and then they stop. That's it, finished. They can't do it anymore. Once you find out you're not a Kohen, then you can't carry on being a Kohen. It doesn't matter how long you've been doing it in the past, and vice versa as well. People who didn't know they were Kohanim and they found out that they were, and then all of a sudden they start taking on the customs of being a Kohen and going up to bless the people and getting the first aliyah and everything that goes together with it.
But who tells them? Who has the authority to say,
Oh,
you think
go.
you're one thing, but you're not, and here's why?
Here, they'll go ask.
Who?
Whoever they ask, whoever they look at as being their spiritual mentor. Right? And if that person feels that he's not qualified to be able to answer that, then he'll take the question himself onto his spiritual mentor in order to find out what to do.
You know cases like that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Oh.
It's interesting. I know in my family, I've mentioned this in the past on many occasions, but in my family, my aunt, my mother's sister, married somebody called Cohen, and the whole family are Levium. Because what happened when they got off the boat, they came to Wales and they got off the boat over there, and the fellow told them, "You Jewish?" They said yes. So the immigration official says your name is Cohen because that was the only Jewish name he knew.
Yeah.
It was a different name. I guess it was too complicated for this fellow to write it down. He didn't know how to do that, so he just called them Kohen. So there's a whole clan. There's a few hundred of them today. A whole clan of Kohens who are all Levian.
Did I send you that about Moshe Platnik?
Yeah. So it's interesting, right? Now, redeeming yourself as a firstborn is something which needs to be done properly. What do you do if you redeem yourself to a Kohen who's not really a Kohen? How can you redeem yourself to somebody if you're not sure that he's a Kohen? What's the proof? What's he going to bring you? So the Vilna Gaon, the great Vilna Gaon, he lived about 250 years ago in Vilna. So he was a firstborn, and he was continuously redeeming himself. Whenever he came across a Kohen, because he was concerned that maybe the Kohen, the original Kohen wasn't the real Kohen, he kept redeeming himself over and over and over again, until finally, along came to Vilna somebody called Rappaport.
Oh,
Rappaport is a very famous Kohanic name, and he had not just his name was Rappaport, but he had what's called a Megillas Yechusim. He had a whole family tree to prove that he was directly descended from Aaron, father after father after father, directly all the way back to Aaron. And at that point, the Vilna Gaon redeemed himself once more with this person, and then he stopped. That was it. So here, we've got a whole list over here of what's going on. We've got a whole list over here of the different families. I don't want to go through it, but you can read them through. What we have to look at, though, is what was their jobs. So it says like this, here, for example, verse number 23. That's where they were. V'nisi beis Ava Gershon Eliasaf ben Lael, u'mishmeres b'nei Gershon bo'el moed ha'mishkan v'oyel, michseu masach pesach ha'oyel moed. What was their job? What did they have to do? So their job was the tabernacle, the tent, its cover, the screen, the entrance, the curtains, the courtyard, all of these things had to be taken down, and they had to be wrapped up and looked after. And then you've got kahas. Verse number 27. Ula kahas mishpachas ha'amrami, u'mishpachas ha'itzori, u'mishpachas ha'chevroni, u'mishpachas ha'uzieli, elahei mishpachos ha'kasi. What was their job? Their job was mishmatam ha'aron v'ha'shulchan v'ha'manoy v'ha'mizbachos u'klei ha'kodesh asher yishasu behem. They had to look after what? They had to look after the ark and the table and the menorah and the altars. That was what their job was. And that meant that they had to take it around. Now, their job was extremely dangerous, because the Aron was the ark was something which was so incredibly spiritual, it was so incredibly holy, that if it was treated in the wrong way in any shape or form whatsoever, that was pretty deadly. There's a very famous case when King David wanted to bring the ark to Jerusalem, and it was sitting on a wagon, and it started rocking around a little bit, and the person whose wagon it was, he was concerned. He went to try to hold on to the Aron to stop it from moving, and he dropped down dead on the spot. Which means that the Aron is something of tremendous, tremendous spiritual significance. The more spiritually significant something is, the greater is the danger to be around it if you're not on the level to be able to be there. Right, we're back to X-rays again. Anybody who's not qualified is not allowed to come near these things. Which means if you're qualified, if you're a Kohen, or if you're a Levi that's been designated to deal with this particular thing, then presumably you're okay. But anybody else, it's going to be a problem. And even if you're designated to take one utensil and you got to take another one instead, that's going to be a problem.
Because you brought up the thing with David HaMelech, that's why I said so.
Yeah. Lemari Mishpachas HaMachli, down at the bottom over here on page 740. What was their job? Ufkudas Mishmes B'nei Mari Kasheh Mishkan Bricha V'Amudah V'Adanav. They got the heavy work. They had to take, here, what are they called? The bars and the planks and the pillars and the sockets and utensils and everything. These were big, heavy things that had to be carried around.
Well, why would anybody do this if you don't know if you're at the proper spiritual height, that you won't be...
I guess Pshat is like this. You know what? It's a good question. If you're being told that this is what you need to do, then presumably that means that right now that's where you're holding. Right now, if you want to make sure that you're going to be okay, then you've got to carry on holding on to your level. I don't know if you remember, but we spoke a little while ago back in Sefer Shmois, we spoke about the idea of what was called the lechem aponim.
Yeah.
The showbread, the special breads that were made, they were baked every week, and there were 12 of them, right? Two rows of 6, and they sat on the table. And the Gemara says the most astonishing thing about the lechem aponim, that the lechem aponim remained fresh. It was 9 days old, this stuff, because it was baked on Erev Shabbos, and it was eaten Shabbos afterwards. Right, so that's Friday, Shabbos, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Shabbos. 9 days it's sitting over there. And say Chazal, say the sages like this. I think it's terrifying, I really do. They say like this, that if you, the Kohanim, if you were righteous, then your piece of bread, you got a small piece of bread every week, your piece of bread would be nice and warm and fresh as if it just came out of the oven right now, even though it's 9 days old.
It wasn't impressionable. Isn't the word, wasn't it impressionable?
I don't know. Lechem haponim, lechem hapanim, your panim is your face. That's why in English it's translated into show bread.
Yeah.
Right? What was the show? Not because they brought the bread out and they showed it, which they did do, but because it showed what your spiritual level was. I think that's terrifying, no?
Terrifying.
You come on Shabbos to get your piece of bread, and what you're being given is a spiritual indicator of where you're holding.
Boy, maybe it was crusty. Your portion.
Which means like this: if it's beautiful, fresh, and crusty, then that's wonderful. But what about if you come one Shabbos, you come and you get given a cold, dense piece of 9-day-old bread? What does that mean?
Say I'm double parked.
That means that your spiritual state is no good. How is that? Seriously, how is that for a motivator? Everybody's watching, right? Everybody's getting this stuff at the same time, right? So you've got one or two alternatives, right? One alternative is to work on yourself all week to make sure that you stay on the right spiritual level so that you can get a hot piece of bread, right? The other alternative is that when you go there the next Shabbos and you get this cold, horrible thing, is that you get a hold of it and you go, this is so hot, right? In the hope that everyone's going to say, wow, this guy's a real tzaddik. Sure, this guy's really righteous. I don't know. I think here, you've been given a designation over here, right? You've been given something that you've got to look after, and you've been given that because you're able to look after it, and you've got to hold on to that status, because if you don't, you could be causing all kinds of problems for yourself.
It's dangerous stuff.
That's for sure, right? That's for sure. Let's flip over the page. Maybe we'll end with this for today, maybe. Verse number 39. Kol pkudei alevim asher pakad Moshe va'Aaron al pi Hashem lemishpachosam kol zachar ben chodesh v'mala shnayim ve'esrim olef. 22,000 Jews. That's what there are. 22,000 Levium. That's what there are. And we're going to see, because there's going to be a problem over here trying to factor in the math with the amount of firstborns and the amount of Levium, and it doesn't exactly shtim, it doesn't exactly fit together. So we'll see in Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow. We'll see there's a whole calculation that needs to be done in order to make this happen.